The autumn wind whispered through the maple trees of Asheville, North Carolina, carrying with it the bittersweet scent of change. Lara Brooks stood at her bedroom window, watching leaves dance across their front yard one last time. Her slender fingers absently twisted a strand of hair, a nervous habit she'd never managed to break. The morning light caught the tears threatening to spill from her hazel eyes, making them shimmer like morning dew. "It's just a year," she whispered to herself, the words feeling hollow in the empty room. Her gaze drifted to the worn leather diary on her desk, its pages filled with dreams that now seemed childishly naive. At 19, she'd imagined her life would unfold like the stories she loved, full of adventure, passion, and choice. Instead, here she was, packing her life into a single suitcase, preparing to become something between a tenant and a possession. The sound of dishes clattering downstairs drew her attention. Her mother was stress cleaning again, a habit that had intensified since their world had begun crumbling 3 months ago. The family business, a beloved local bookstore that had served Asheville for 3 generations, was drowning in debt. The recession had hit them hard, but it was her father's illness that had delivered the final blow, the medical bills alone. Lara's fingers traced the edge of the contract sitting on her nightstand. The paper was expensive, the kind that whispered of power and privilege. The terms were clear, clinical. In exchange for clearing her family's debt, all of it, she would spend 1 year living in New York City with David Monroe, one of Manhattan's most formidable corporate attorneys. The arrangement was legal, carefully worded to avoid any implications of impropriety. She would be a live-in companion, helping to maintain his social calendar and attend events as needed. The contract had arrived with a first-class ticket to New York and a black credit card bearing her name. Both felt like chains disguised as wings. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Honey?" Her mother's voice cracked slightly. "The car will be here in an hour." "Coming, Mom." Lara quickly wiped her eyes, straightening her simple white sundress, one of the few pieces of her old life she'd decided to take with her. The rest of her new wardrobe would be waiting in New York, chosen by someone who probably had very different ideas about who Lara Brooks should be. Downstairs, the scene nearly broke her resolve. Her mother had prepared all her favorites for breakfast: blueberry pancakes, crispy bacon, fresh orange juice. The kitchen smelled like Sunday mornings and childhood safety. Her father sat at the table, looking smaller than she remembered, his once robust frame diminished by months of illness. "My brave girl," he said, opening his arms. Lara fell into them, inhaling the familiar scent of his aftershave mixed with coffee. "You don't have to do this. We can find another way." But they both knew there wasn't another way. The debt collectors had made that clear. The bookstore would be seized, their home foreclosed, and her father's treatment would stop. Unless— "It's okay, Dad." Lara managed a smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Think of it as an adventure. A year in New York City. Most people would kill for that opportunity." Her mother's attempt at a laugh sounded more like a sob. "Just promise you'll call every day, and if anything makes you uncomfortable." "Mom, please." Lara squeezed her hand. "Mr. Monroe's reputation is impeccable. His firm handles cases for half the Fortune 500. Besides, everything's spelled out in the contract. I'll basically be a glorified personal assistant who happens to live in his house." The house in question was a penthouse overlooking Central Park, according to the papers. The thought made her stomach clench. She'd never even been to New York City, and now she'd be living in the kind of place she'd only seen in movies. Breakfast was a quiet affair, punctuated by forced cheerfulness and careful avoidance of the elephant in the room. No one mentioned the real reason a powerful 34-year-old lawyer would want a teenage girl living in his home. The contract explicitly prohibited any romantic or physical relationship, but Lara wasn't naive. She'd seen the single photo included in the paperwork: David Monroe at some charity gala, tall and imposing in a perfectly tailored suit, his dark hair touched with distinguished silver at the temples, those striking gray-blue eyes seeming to pierce through the camera lens. The sound of tires on gravel announced the arrival of her ride. A sleek black car pulled up, the driver emerging with military precision to collect her luggage. This was really happening. "Remember who you are," her father whispered as he hugged her goodbye. "You're a Brooks. We bend, but we don't break." Lara nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She clutched her diary to her chest, the one personal item she refused to leave behind, and walked toward the car. Each step felt like moving through molasses. her legs heavy with the weight of responsibility and fear. The driver held the door open, and Lara caught a glimpse of her reflection in the tinted window. A young woman looked back at her, seemingly composed despite the storm raging inside. She lifted her chin, remembering her father's words, "Bend, don't break." As the car pulled away, Lara forced herself not to look back at her parents' shrinking figures. Instead, she opened her diary to a fresh page and began to write, "Dear Diary, today I learned that love has a price. For my family, I'll pay it, but I promise myself this. Whatever happens in New York, whatever this year brings, I won't lose myself. I'll bend, but I won't break." The autumn colors of Asheville blurred past her window, giving way to highways and eventually the concrete canyons of a city she'd only dreamed about. Somewhere in that urban maze, David Monroe was waiting, a man who could buy and sell people's futures with a signature, who had purchased a year of her life as easily as others might buy coffee. What Lara didn't know, couldn't know, was that she was about to step into a world where contracts couldn't control hearts, where carefully laid plans would unravel in the face of unexpected emotions, and where the price of love would turn out to be very different from what anyone had calculated. The car merged onto the interstate, carrying her toward a future that felt both like a sentence and a salvation. In her lap, her diary lay open, the fresh ink still drying on its pages. Above, the October sky stretched endlessly blue, indifferent to the small dramas playing out beneath it. And somewhere ahead, Manhattan's towers reached toward that same sky, waiting to swallow her whole. She closed her eyes, breathing deeply. Her new life was about to begin, for better or worse. All she could do now was face it with the grace and courage her parents had taught her. After all, it was just a year, just 365 days of living with a stranger, of being something between an employee and an ornament. Just 1 year pretending that this arrangement wasn't slowly breaking her heart before it had even begun. The highway stretched ahead, an asphalt ribbon leading her toward Manhattan's glittering promises and hidden threats, toward David Monroe and whatever fate awaited her in his world of power, privilege, and carefully worded contracts. 1 year to save her family, 1 year to survive with her soul intact, 1 year that would change everything. Manhattan loomed before Lara like a fortress of glass and steel, its towers catching the late afternoon sun in a display that would have been beautiful if it hadn't felt so threatening. The car glided to a stop in front of a building that seemed to pierce the clouds themselves, its sleek facade a testament to power and privilege. "Miss Brooks?" The doorman's voice was professionally neutral as he opened the car door. "Welcome to the Augustine. Mr. Monroe's residence is on the top floor." Lara stepped out, clutching her diary like a shield. Her simple sundress, which had felt perfectly adequate in Asheville, now seemed hopelessly provincial against the backdrop of Midtown sophistication. A woman in a power suit strode past, her heels clicking a rhythm of confidence on the marble floor of the lobby. Lara fought the urge to shrink into herself. The elevator ride to the penthouse felt eternal. Lara watched the numbers climb, each floor taking her further from everything familiar. Floor 40, 41, 42. Her heart seemed to beat in time with the ascending numbers. Finally, with a soft chime, the doors opened directly into what could only be described as a magazine-worthy apartment. "You're early." The voice cut through the space like a blade, smooth, cultured, and distinctly displeased. David Monroe stood by floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a stunning view of Central Park, his back to her. Even from behind, he radiated authority. When he turned, Lara felt her breath catch. The photo hadn't done him justice. In person, David Monroe was more imposing, more real, and infinitely more intimidating. His gray-blue eyes assessed her with the same clinical precision she imagined he used to evaluate contracts and depositions. His perfectly tailored suit probably cost more than her father's monthly medical bills. "I apologize," Lara managed, hating how small her voice sounded. The traffic was lighter than expected. "Punctuality means arriving exactly when expected, Miss Brooks. Not early, not late." He crossed the room, each step measured and purposeful. "Your room is down that hallway, last door on the right. My housekeeper, Mrs. Liu, has arranged your new wardrobe. I suggest you change before dinner." He paused, finally really looking at her. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, disappointment, before his expression smoothed back to professional neutrality. "You're younger than I expected." "I'm 19, Lara said, lifting her chin slightly. as stated in the contract. A muscle ticked in his jaw. Yes, well, numbers on paper can feel quite different in reality. He turned away, dismissing her. Dinner is at 7. Sharp. Lara found her room, though room seemed an inadequate word for the space. It was larger than her entire upstairs at home, with its own sitting area and a bathroom that could have housed a small family. The walls were a soft gray, the furnishings modern and expensive. It felt like a luxury hotel suite, beautiful and impersonal. The closet, however, stopped her in her tracks. Rows of designer clothes, shoes, and accessories filled the space, each piece carefully chosen and organized by color and occasion. A note in elegant handwriting sat on the dresser. Miss Brooks, I've selected appropriate attire for various occasions you may encounter during your stay. Each section is labeled for convenience. For tonight's dinner, please select from the casual evening section. Mrs. Liu. Lara ran her fingers over the fabrics. Silk, cashmere, fine wool. These clothes belonged to a different person. Someone who knew how to navigate the world David Monroe inhabited. Someone who wasn't her. A knock at the door made her jump. Come in. A woman entered, probably in her 50s, Asian, with kind eyes and an efficient manner. I'm Mrs. Liu. I hope everything is to your satisfaction. It's overwhelming, Lara admitted honestly. Mrs. Liu's expression softened slightly. Mr. Monroe expects certain standards, but you'll adjust. For tonight, perhaps this. She pulled out a simple black dress with 3/4 sleeves. Classic, elegant, but not too formal, and it won't make you feel like you're wearing a costume. Lara smiled gratefully. Thank you. Dinner is served precisely at 7 in the main dining room. Mr. Monroe appreciates. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Structure. After Mrs. Liu left, Lara sat on the edge of the enormous bed, finally allowing herself a moment to process. She opened her diary. Dear diary, everything here feels like a dream, or maybe a nightmare. The clothes, the view, the apartment. It's all perfect. Too perfect. Like a beautiful cage. And David Monroe. He's exactly what I feared, and nothing like I expected. He looks at me like I'm a contract that might have a hidden clause he missed. I don't know how to be what he wants. I don't even know what he wants. At 6:57, Lara made her way to the dining room, wearing the dress Mrs. Liu had suggested and a pair of simple black flats. She found David already seated at the head of a table that could have hosted a board meeting. He glanced at his watch. 3 minutes early? Better. Dinner was served by a silent staff member, some kind of fish that probably had a French name, vegetables arranged like art. Lara concentrated on remembering which fork to use, hyper-aware of David's occasional glances. Your responsibilities will begin tomorrow, he said finally, breaking the silence. My assistant, Tasha, will brief you on your duties. Primarily, you'll help maintain my social calendar and accompany me to various functions as needed. What sort of functions? Charity galas, business dinners, social events that require a... He paused, sipping his wine. Companion. The word hung between them, heavy with unspoken implications. And during the day? Lara asked, forcing herself to meet his gaze. You're free to occupy yourself as you wish, within reason. The building has excellent security, and you'll have a driver available if needed. I assume you can entertain yourself? I like to read, she said, then immediately felt foolish for such a simple statement. Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. The library is through those doors. Feel free to use it. He stood, straightening his cuffs in a gesture she would come to recognize as his way of ending conversations. I have calls to make. Good evening, Miss Brooks. Alone again, Lara found herself drawn to the library. She pushed open the heavy doors and gasped. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined every wall, filled with leather-bound volumes and first editions. A rolling ladder allowed access to the highest shelves, and comfortable leather chairs invited hours of reading. For the first time since arriving, something in her chest loosened. Books, she understood. Books had been her family's life, their legacy. She ran her fingers along the spines, reading titles at random, until one caught her eye. Pride and Prejudice. A first edition. That's worth more than most cars. She spun around to find David watching her from the doorway, his expression unreadable. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. You can read whatever you like, he interrupted. Just be careful with the first editions. He studied her for a moment longer than necessary. You said your family owned a bookstore? For 3 generations, Lara replied, surprised he'd remembered that detail from her background check. He nodded once, then turned to leave, but he paused at the threshold. Miss Brooks? Yes. The dress suits you. Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving Lara to wonder if that had been a compliment or merely another clinical observation. She carefully replaced the book and retreated to her room, where she added a final note to her diary entry. P.S. I think I just met Mr. Darcy's coldly corporate American cousin. Except this isn't a novel, and I'm not Elizabeth Bennet. This is real life, and I'm just a girl who sold a year of her life to save her family. I have to remember that, no matter what happens, no matter how he looks at me or doesn't look at me, this is business, just business. In her massive bed that night, surrounded by luxury but feeling utterly alone, Lara stared at the city lights twinkling beyond her window. Somewhere in this glittering maze of a city, there had to be a way to survive this year with her heart intact. She just had to find it. The sound of a door closing echoed through the apartment. David, presumably heading to his own room. Lara rolled over, pulling the silk covers up to her chin. Tomorrow, her new life would truly begin. Tomorrow, she would start learning how to navigate this world of wealth and power, of unspoken rules and carefully maintained distances. Tomorrow, she would start learning how to live in Manhattan's shadow, under the watchful eye of a man who seemed to have everything figured out except, perhaps, how to be human. Morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, painting Lara's room in shades of gold. She'd been awake for hours, watching dawn break over Manhattan, the city slowly coming alive beneath her. The enormity of her new reality felt heavier in these quiet morning hours. A knock at her door broke through her reverie. "Girl, you better be decent because I'm coming in." The door swung open to reveal a striking woman with elaborately braided hair, wearing a bold red pantsuit and statement jewelry. She breezed into the room like a hurricane of positive energy. "I'm Tasha Green, David's executive assistant, and your new best friend." She dropped onto Lara's bed with comfortable familiarity. "And honey, we need to talk about that sad little sundress you wore yesterday. Mrs. Liu told me all about it." Lara felt her cheeks warm. No explanations needed. We're going to fix everything." Tasha's warm brown eyes sparkled with mischief. First lesson of surviving in David Monroe's world. Appearance isn't everything, but it's a lot. Now come on, let's raid that closet Mrs. Liu filled for you. Over the next hour, Tasha proved to be a whirlwind of knowledge, advice, and surprising warmth. She helped Lara select a sophisticated casual outfit, dark jeans, a silk blouse, and ballet flats, while downloading essential information about her new life. "David's schedule is sacred," Tasha explained, expertly styling Lara's hair. "He has everything planned down to the minute. Your job is to fit into those plans seamlessly." She paused, meeting Lara's eyes in the mirror. "But between you and me, the man needs someone to mess up his perfect little world a bit." "I don't think he'd appreciate that," Lara murmured. "Honey, what he appreciates and what he needs are 2 very different things." Tasha stepped back, admiring her work. "Perfect. Now, let's go over your schedule for the week." They moved to the kitchen, where Mrs. Liu had left breakfast, fresh fruit, yogurt, and pastries. Tasha pulled out a tablet and began running through a dizzying array of appointments and events. "Tonight is simple. Dinner here with David and a potential client. Tomorrow, you have a fitting for the Harrison Foundation Gala next week. Thursday is, good morning." David's voice cut through the kitchen, and Lara nearly choked on her coffee. He stood in the doorway, impeccable in a charcoal suit, his presence immediately filling the space. His eyes swept over her new outfit, lingering for a fraction of a second before turning to Tasha. "The Jensen contract, on your desk, flagged for review," Tasha replied smoothly. "Along with the quarterly reports and your updated calendar." He nodded, then turned back to Lara. "I trust Miss Green is getting you oriented." "Yes, she's been very helpful." "Good. Tonight's dinner is at 7. The client is Lawrence Porter from Porter Technologies. He's bringing his wife." His tone suggested this information should mean something to her. Tasha jumped in. "I've already briefed Lara on the Porter's background and interests. She'll be perfect." Something like skepticism flickered across David's face, but he simply nodded and left. The sound of his shoes on the hardwood floors faded away. "Don't let him intimidate you," Tasha said once he was gone. David's like one of those fancy European cars, all sleek exterior and complicated machinery inside. She grinned, and just as high maintenance. The rest of the morning was a crash course in New York high society. Tasha taught her about the key players, the unspoken rules, the delicate dance of power and influence that seemed to govern everything in this world. The most important thing, Tasha emphasized, is to remember that you belong here now. These people can smell insecurity like sharks smell blood. After lunch, Tasha had to return to the office, leaving Lara alone with her thoughts. She wandered into the library, drawn to its quiet comfort. To her surprise, David was there, reading through what looked like legal documents. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt," she said quickly, turning to leave. "Stay." The word was soft but clear. "The library is meant to be used." Hesitantly, Lara selected a book and settled into one of the leather chairs. They sat in surprisingly comfortable silence, the only sounds the rustle of pages and the distant hum of the city below. "What are you reading?" His question startled her. "Oh, The Great Gatsby." She held up the book. "Another first edition. Fitting," he murmured, almost to himself. Then, louder, "What do you think of it?" "It's about the danger of trying to recreate the past," Lara said, then flushed when his full attention turned to her, "and about the way wealth can corrupt dreams." Something shifted in his expression, interest, maybe, or surprise, but before he could respond, his phone buzzed. The moment shattered as he returned to his work, the wall between them firmly back in place. The afternoon passed quickly as Lara prepared for dinner. Tasha had left detailed notes about the Porters, their businesses, their interests, even their children's names. It felt like studying for an exam where failure wasn't an option. At precisely 6:45, Lara emerged from her room wearing a navy cocktail dress that Mrs. Liu had selected. She found David in the living room, adjusting his cufflinks. "Mr. Porter appreciates punctuality," he said by way of greeting. Then he really looked at her, and for a moment, his carefully maintained composure slipped. "You look appropriate." Before Lara could respond, the elevator chimed. Lawrence Porter was a jovial man with silver hair and an expensive watch. His wife, Marianne, was elegant in that effortless way that spoke of generations of wealth. "David," Lawrence boomed. "And this must be the lovely Lara we've heard about." Dinner was an elaborate dance of small talk and business discussion. Lara found herself drawing on everything Tasha had taught her, carefully navigating conversations about art galleries she'd never visited and restaurants she'd never heard of. "So, dear," Marianne Porter said during dessert, "how did you and David meet?" The question hung in the air like a trap. Lara felt David tense beside her, but before he could speak, she smiled. "Actually, it was through books. My family owned a bookstore, and David has the most amazing library. Sometimes the best connections come from shared passions, don't you think?" It wasn't exactly a lie, she told herself, just a careful rearrangement of truth, like the way Mrs. Liu rearranged flowers to hide their imperfections. David's hand found hers under the table, a brief, surprising squeeze that could have meant anything from approval to warning. But when she glanced at him, his expression gave nothing away. After the Porters left, David poured himself a scotch and stood by the windows, looking out at the city lights. "You handled that well," he said finally. "The story about the books, it was clever." "Thank you." Lara hesitated, then added, "I didn't want to lie." He turned to face her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Sometimes the truth is more complicated than people want to hear. Is that why you needed someone like me?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. "For your image?" For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, "My good night, Miss Brooks." Alone in her room later, Lara wrote in her diary, "Dear Diary, today I learned that everything here is a performance. The clothes, the conversations, even the silences. David Monroe lives in a world where every word is measured, every gesture calculated. But sometimes, just sometimes, I catch glimpses of something real beneath all that perfection, like the way his hand felt when he squeezed mine, warm and almost human. But I can't think about that. I can't let myself see him as anything more than what he is, a man who bought a year of my life. No matter how many books we discuss or moments we share, that's the truth at the heart of everything, isn't it?" She closed the diary and walked to her window, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. Below, Manhattan sparkled like a jewelry box full of dreams and deceptions. Somewhere in all of this, There had to be truth. She just had to learn how to recognize it beneath all the perfect performances. The sound of classical music drifted from David's study. Chopin, she thought. Another layer of his carefully constructed world. But as she listened, she couldn't help wondering if maybe, just maybe, the music was one of those rare moments when he let himself feel something real. Tomorrow would bring new lessons, new performances, new moments of truth and deception. But for now, Lara let herself drift off to sleep to the sound of piano notes floating through the walls, dreaming of a world where truth didn't need to wear such beautiful disguises. The boutique mirror reflected 3 versions of Lara as she turned slowly, examining the gown she wore. The Harrison Foundation Gala was tomorrow night, and this final fitting felt more like an interrogation than a fashion appointment. No, absolutely not, came Tasha's voice from behind her. The blue makes her look like a teenager at prom. We need something that says, I belong in this world. The boutique owner, a razor-thin woman named Madame Beaumont, pursed her lips. Perhaps the black Valentino. Too safe, Tasha countered. David's other companions always played it safe. Lara needs to stand out. Other companions. The words hit Lara like tiny daggers. How many had there been? What happened to them? She caught Tasha's eye in the mirror, but her friend was already moving on, rifling through another rack of designer gowns. This one. Tasha pulled out a dress in deep burgundy. Trust me. 20 minutes later, Lara barely recognized herself. The burgundy gown hugged her curves before flowing out dramatically, with a subtle slit that showed just enough leg to be sophisticated rather than scandalous. The color made her hazel eyes look almost golden, and gave her pale skin a luminous quality. Now that, Tasha said triumphantly, is how you make David Monroe forget how to breathe. That's not what I'm trying to do, Lara protested weakly. Honey, that's exactly what you need to do. Tasha's expression grew serious. Look, I've worked for David for 3 years. I've seen the parade of perfectly appropriate companions he's had at these events. All of them looked like they came straight from a high society catalog. Beautiful, bland, and completely forgettable. You're different. Because I'm younger? Because I'm not from this world? Because you're real. Tasha adjusted the dress's neckline. And whether he admits it or not, that's what David needs. Someone who reminds him there's more to life than contracts and appearances. Back at the penthouse, Lara found David in the library again. He'd been spending more time there lately, though she tried not to read anything into that. He looked up as she entered, his reading glasses perched on his nose in a way that made him look surprisingly approachable. How was the fitting? Fine. Tasha helped me choose something appropriate. His lips twitched slightly. Should I be worried? About the dress? Or about me? The question slipped out before she could stop it. For a moment, something flashed in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or something deeper. Both, I suspect, he said finally, removing his glasses. Miss Brooks, tomorrow night is important. The Harrison Foundation Gala is more than just another social event. It's where deals are made, alliances are formed, and reputations are cemented or destroyed. No pressure, Lara muttered. To her surprise, he almost smiled. You'll do fine. Just remember what Tasha taught you about the key players, and stay close to me. Is that an order, Mr. Monroe? This time he did smile, albeit briefly. Consider it a strong suggestion. Now, have you eaten? Mrs. Liu made her famous dumplings. They ate dinner together in the kitchen, something that had been happening more frequently lately. It was almost domestic, if you ignored the contract that hung invisibly between them. Tell me about your family's bookstore, he said suddenly. Lara looked up, startled. Why? Professional curiosity. I reviewed the financial documents when we made our arrangement, but numbers don't tell the whole story. She studied him for a moment, trying to read his motivation, but his face gave nothing away. It was called Brooks and Books, she began slowly. My grandfather started it after World War II. He believed books could heal souls, that's what he always said. Every Sunday, he'd host reading circles for local kids. She smiled at the memory. The store smelled like old paper and coffee. We had these huge leather armchairs that were older than me, and regulars who'd been coming in since before I was born. And now? Now it's probably going to become a chain coffee shop or a boutique selling overpriced candles. She set down her fork. Unless our arrangement changes things, the debt will be cleared by the end of the month, he said, his tone professional again. Your family can keep the store. Just like that? Because I agreed to be your— What exactly am I, Mr. Monroe? He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You should rest. Tomorrow will be a long day. But Lara wasn't finished. Something about his retreat made her bold. Do you ever get tired of it? The perfect control, the careful distances, the way you treat everything, everyone, like a business transaction. He turned back, and for a moment, his facade cracked. The look in his eyes was almost raw. What I get tired of, Miss Brooks, is people assuming they know anything about me based on what they see on the surface. Then let me see more than the surface. The words hung between them, loaded with implications neither of them was ready to face. David's hands clenched at his sides, and Lara could almost see him rebuilding his walls. Good night, Miss Brooks. Later that night, unable to sleep, Lara found herself drawn to the sound of music again. It was coming from the living room this time, not David's study. Wrapping herself in a silk robe, she padded quietly down the hallway. She found him sitting at the grand piano she'd never seen him use before. His suit jacket was gone, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his hair slightly disheveled. He was playing something she didn't recognize, something that sounded like contained chaos. Beautiful, but tortured, Lara stood in the shadows, watching his fingers move across the keys. This was a different David Monroe than the one who ruled boardrooms and intimidated socialites. This man seemed almost human. As if sensing her presence, he stopped playing. I couldn't sleep. The music woke me. She lied. I apologize. Don't. She moved closer. What were you playing? Rachmaninoff, Prelude in C-sharp minor. He stared at the keys. My mother insisted on piano lessons. Said music builds character. Did it? It built something. He looked up at her then, and in the dim light, his eyes seemed darker, deeper. You should go back to bed, Miss Brooks. Tomorrow is an important day. You keep saying that. She took another step closer. But what makes it so important? The business deals? The social connections? Or is it something else? For a long moment, he just looked at her. Then he stood, closing the piano lid with careful precision. What makes it important, Miss Brooks, is that tomorrow you'll be seen with me in public for the first time. People will make assumptions. They'll ask questions. They'll want to know who you are and what you mean to me. And what should I tell them? He moved past her, his shoulder barely brushing hers. Tell them whatever you like. Just remember, this is still a contract. But as he walked away, Lara couldn't help noticing that his hands were shaking slightly. She returned to her room and opened her diary. Dear diary, tonight I saw cracks in David Monroe's perfect facade. Behind all the power and control, there's someone who plays Rachmaninoff at midnight and trembles at the thought of tomorrow. I'm starting to wonder if I'm not the only one pretending to be something I'm not. Tomorrow everyone will see us together, and they'll all want to know what we are to each other. The problem is, I'm not sure I know anymore. How do you stick to the terms of a contract when your heart starts writing new clauses? She closed the diary and went to the window. The city lights blurred through unshed tears. Tomorrow would change everything. She could feel it in her bones. Tomorrow she would step into the spotlight as David Monroe's, whatever she was. And somehow, she had to remember that this was all just business, even as her heart whispered that it might be becoming something more. In the distance, she could hear the faint notes of the piano again. David had returned to his midnight concert. This time, though, the melody was different, softer, almost yearning, like a question neither of them dared to ask out loud. The Harrison Foundation Gala transformed the Metropolitan Museum of Art into a glittering wonderland. Crystal chandeliers cast diamond-like reflections across marble floors, while New York's elite moved through the space like perfectly choreographed dancers. Lara stood at the top of the grand staircase, her heart thundering against her ribs. Remember to breathe, David murmured beside her, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back. The touch sent electricity through her spine, even through the fabric of her burgundy gown. He looked devastating in his tuxedo, every inch the powerful attorney who could make or break fortunes with a single word. But there was something else tonight, a tension in his jaw, a darkness in his eyes when he looked at her that hadn't been there before. Ready? He asked. No, she wanted to say. I'll never be ready for this. Instead, she nodded. They descended the stairs together, and Lara felt every eye in the room turn toward them. The burgundy dress moved like liquid fire around her legs, the slit offering teasing glimpses of skin with each step. She heard the whispers start immediately. Who was she? Where had David Monroe found her? What happened to his usual type? David, darling, a woman in her 50s dripping in diamonds, intercepted them at the bottom of the stairs. You must introduce us to your lovely friend, Madeline. David's smile was diplomatic. This is Lara Brooks. Lara, Madeline Harrison. The gala's hostess, of course. Lara summoned everything Tasha had taught her about poise and presence. Mrs. Harrison, the museum looks absolutely magical tonight. The way you've integrated the modern lighting with the classical architecture is inspired. Madeline's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose slightly. Why, thank you, dear. David, she's delightful. So different from your usual. She trailed off meaningfully. If you'll excuse us, David said smoothly, guiding Lara away. His hand was tense against her back. The next hour was a blur of introductions and careful conversations. Lara watched David work the room, noting how he shifted his approach for each person, more aggressive with the hedge fund managers, more solicitous with the old money crowd, carefully neutral with potential rivals. You're staring, he whispered during a brief moment alone. I'm learning, she countered. Isn't that what you wanted? Someone who could navigate your world? Something flickered in his expression. Is that what you think this is about? Before she could answer, they were interrupted by a tall man with silver hair and cold eyes. Monroe, surprised to see you here after the Richardson deal. David's posture shifted subtly. Maxwell, I wasn't aware you were on the guest list. Last-minute invitation. Like your lovely companion, I assume. Maxwell's gaze raked over Lara in a way that made her skin crawl. She seems a bit young for your usual taste. Lara felt David tense beside her. The atmosphere crackled with unspoken hostility. Actually, Lara cut in, her voice sweet but steel-edged. David and I were just discussing the Richardson case. Fascinating how some lawyers mistake aggressive posturing for actual strategy, isn't it? Maxwell's face darkened. David's hand tightened on her waist, warning or approval, she couldn't tell. If you'll excuse us, David said, steering her toward the dance floor as the orchestra struck up a waltz. That was either very brave or very foolish. Did I just make things worse? He pulled her into his arms, one hand settling on her waist, the other taking hers. Maxwell's been trying to poach my clients for months. He's also been spreading rumors about my personal arrangements. You mean about women like me? Their bodies moved together with surprising grace. How many were there? 3. All perfectly respectable companions for social functions, all carefully vetted and professionally contracted. His eyes met hers. None of them quite like you. Is that a compliment or a complaint? I haven't decided yet. He spun her expertly, drawing her back slightly closer than before. You're dangerous, Miss Brooks. Because I stood up to Maxwell. Because you make me forget myself. The admission hung between them as they moved across the floor. Lara was acutely aware of every point where their bodies touched, of the way his thumb traced small circles on her hand, of how his breath brushed her temple when he pulled her closer to avoid another couple. David, she started, but he shook his head. Don't. Not here. The music ended and they separated reluctantly. The rest of the evening passed in a haze of champagne and calculated conversations. Lara played her role perfectly, charming but not flirtatious, intelligent but not threatening, always by David's side but never clinging. It was well past midnight when they finally left. The car ride back to the penthouse was silent, charged with everything they hadn't said on the dance floor. In the elevator, David loosened his bow tie and Lara watched the simple action with far too much interest. You were magnificent tonight, he said as they entered the apartment. Every person who spoke to you was impressed. Maxwell looked ready to offer you a job by the end of the evening. Is that what you wanted? For me to impress your world? He turned to face her, his expression intense. What I wanted and what I got are two very different things. Then tell me what you want now. David moved closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, see the faint stubble on his jaw. What I want, he said softly, is to forget about contracts and appearances and propriety. What I want is to... He stopped, his hands clenching at his sides. Lara could see the battle raging behind his eyes. Control versus desire, obligation versus impulse. And what you want is to kiss me. She finished for him. His breath caught. Miss Brooks, my name is Lara. She stepped closer, tilting her face up to his. And I'm tired of pretending this is just business. For a moment, she thought he would kiss her. His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone with aching tenderness. But then he stepped back, and the walls slammed back into place. "Get some rest," he said roughly. "Tomorrow we have a breakfast meeting with the Porter team." He strode away, leaving Lara standing alone in her beautiful dress, her skin still tingling where he'd touched her. She made her way to her room and opened her diary with trembling hands. "Dear Diary, tonight I danced with David Monroe, defended his honor, and almost kissed him. None of these things were in the contract. None of these things were supposed to happen. The way he looked at me on that dance floor. It wasn't the way you look at an employee or an arrangement. It was the way you look at someone who's become a dangerous necessity, like oxygen or sunlight or hope." But he walked away. He always walks away. Maybe that's for the best. After all, how can you build something real on a foundation of legal papers and business arrangements? Still, I can't forget the feel of his hand on my back, the way he said I was dangerous, the moment when all his careful control almost shattered. Something changed tonight. I just don't know if it changed enough. She closed the diary and went to her window, her nightly ritual now. The city sparkled below, but all she could see was David's face in that moment before he pulled away. All she could feel was the phantom pressure of his hand on her waist as they danced. From somewhere in the apartment, she heard the familiar sound of the piano, Rachmaninoff again, but this time it sounded like a lament, like something beautiful and impossible being laid to rest. Lara changed out of her gown, carefully hanging it up, a memory of a night when everything and nothing had changed. In the morning, they would go back to their careful dance of professional distance. But now they both knew what lay beneath the surface. What could happen if either of them dared to breach the walls they'd built? The piano music continued, growing more complex and tortured. Lara lay in bed listening, wondering if David was playing for himself or for her, wondering if maybe the music could say what neither of them dared to speak aloud. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new performances, new reasons to maintain their careful distance. But tonight had shown them both a glimpse of what could be, if they were brave enough to tear up the contract and write their own story. The morning after the gala dawned gray and rainy, matching the tension that filled the penthouse. Lara sat at the breakfast table, pushing food around her plate while pretending not to notice David's conspicuous absence. Mrs. Liu moved silently around the kitchen, her worried glances saying everything her lips wouldn't. He left early for the office, Mrs. Liu finally offered, setting down a fresh cup of coffee. There was an urgent matter with the Porter contract. Right, because David Monroe would rather face a corporate crisis than deal with what had almost happened last night. Lara forced a smile. "Of course. Thank you, Mrs. Liu." The elevator chimed, and Tasha burst in, bringing with her the scent of rain and coffee. "Girl, we need to talk. Now." She grabbed Lara's arm and practically dragged her to the library, closing the doors behind them. "The entire city is buzzing about last night," Tasha announced, pulling out her phone. "Look at this." The society page showed a photo of Lara and David dancing. The photographer had caught them in a perfect moment, his face bent toward hers, her dress swirling around them, both lost in their own world. The headline read, "Manhattan's Most Eligible Bachelor's Mystery Woman. Who is Lara Brooks?" "This is bad, isn't it?" Lara sank into a leather chair. "Bad, honey. This is exactly what we wanted. Well, what I wanted." Tasha perched on the arm of the chair. "But something else happened last night. David came to the office at 5 a.m. looking like he hadn't slept, and he's been terrorizing the junior associates all morning. We almost kissed," Lara confessed quietly. "Almost?" Tasha's eyes widened. "What stopped you?" "He did. He just walked away." Lara stood, moving to the window where rain streaked the glass like tears. "Maybe it's better this way. This was supposed to be a business arrangement. Nothing more?" "Oh, sweetie." Tasha's voice softened. It stopped being just business the moment he started playing piano for you at midnight." Before Lara could respond, her phone buzzed with a message from David. "Dinner meeting tonight with Maxwell's team, 7 p.m. at Le Bernardin. Wear something professional. Car will pick you up at 6:30. "He's avoiding me," Lara said, showing Tasha the message. "No, he's protecting himself, and probably you too, in his emotionally stunted way." Tasha stood decisively. "Come on. If we're going to face Maxwell again, you need armor." They spent the afternoon preparing. Tasha briefed her on Maxwell's recent cases, his tactics, his weaknesses. They selected a razor-sharp black suit that made Lara look older, more sophisticated. By the time the car arrived, Lara felt ready for battle. Le Bernardin was exactly the kind of restaurant where deals were made and destroyed over perfect wine pairings. David was waiting outside, and for a moment, his careful mask slipped when he saw her. His eyes darkened, his hands clenching briefly before he recovered. "Miss Brooks," he said formally, "you look appropriate. Always your highest praise, Mr. Monroe." Something like pain flickered across his face before he opened the door, ushering her inside. Maxwell was already there with 2 other attorneys from his firm. His smile was predatory. "Ah, the lovely Miss Brooks? I trust you're recovered from last night's excitement." Lara met his gaze steadily. "Completely, though I'm curious why you requested this meeting. Direct, isn't she?" Maxwell smiled at David. "I can see why you chose her. So different from your usual arrangements." David's hand tightened on his water glass. "The meeting, Maxwell. Of course." Maxwell leaned forward. "I'm here to make you an offer, David. Your entire client list in exchange for keeping certain information private." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. "What information?" David's voice was deadly quiet. Maxwell pulled out a folder. "Your little arrangement with Miss Brooks here. The contract, the payments, everything. Imagine the scandal. One of New York's top attorneys essentially buying a teenage girl's company. Your reputation would never recover." Lara felt the blood drain from her face. How had he gotten the contract? Who had leaked it? "You're bluffing," David said, but his face had gone pale. "Am I?" Maxwell slid a paper across the table. "Page 3, paragraph 2. Quite specific about the nature of the arrangement, isn't it?" David started to reach for the paper, but Lara was faster. She picked it up, read it quickly, then did something that made all 3 men freeze. She laughed. "Mr. Maxwell," she said, her voice clear and steady, "this is an impressive forgery, but it's missing one crucial detail." She pulled out her own copy of the contract, the real one, from her bag. The original was written on custom letterhead with a watermark. "This paper is standard legal stock." She turned to David, whose expression had shifted from shock to something like awe. "Shall we order? I hear the sea base is excellent." Maxwell's face had turned an interesting shade of purple. "This isn't over, Monroe. Actually, it is." David's voice was like steel wrapped in silk. "Because if you ever try to threaten me or Miss Brooks again, I'll make sure every firm in New York knows how you tried to blackmail a colleague with forged documents. Now get out." After Maxwell and his team left, silence fell between Lara and David. Finally, he spoke. "You knew about the watermark. I memorized every detail of that contract before I signed it," she said quietly. "It was the most important document of my life." "Lara," it was the first time he'd used her first name. "What I did, bringing you into this world, exposing you to people like Maxwell, it was selfish. Why did you do it?" He stared into his untouched wine. "Because I saw something in you that first day, something real in a world of fake smiles and empty promises. And I needed that in my life. And now I'm terrified." The admission seemed to cost him something. "Because you've become more than a contract, more than an arrangement. You've become dangerous," she finished. "That's what you said last night." "Yes." A waiter approached, but David waved him away. They sat in charged silence, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. "We should go," David finally said. "It's late." The ride home was quiet, but different from their usual silences. Something had shifted, rules had been broken, walls had begun to crumble. In the elevator, Lara turned to him. "Thank you for defending me tonight. You defended yourself. Brilliantly." He looked down at her, his eyes intense. "I've never had anyone fight for me like that." "That's because you never let anyone close enough to try." The elevator doors opened, but neither moved. They stood there, the air between them electric with possibility. "Lara," he whispered, and this time when he reached for her, he didn't pull away. His kiss was nothing like she'd imagined, and she had imagined it many times. It was softer, more uncertain, as if he was afraid she might shatter under his touch. His hands cradled her face like she was something precious, something he couldn't quite believe was real. When they finally separated, both breathing hard, reality came crashing back. David stepped away, running a hand through his hair. "This can't happen," he said roughly. "The contract." "To hell with the contract," Lara interrupted. "You can't keep hiding behind papers and clauses. This is real, David. We're real." He took another step back, his face a battlefield of emotions. "You should get some rest. We both should. Before she could stop him, he disappeared into his study. The sound of the door locking echoed through the apartment like a gunshot. Alone in her room, Lara opened her diary. Dear diary, tonight I learned that some contracts are made to be broken. David kissed me, really kissed me, and then ran away like a coward. But for those few seconds, when his lips were on mine and his hands were holding me like I was the most precious thing in his world, I saw the real David Monroe, not the powerful attorney, not the controlled businessman, but the man who plays Rachmaninoff at midnight and looks at me like I'm both salvation and damnation. The question is, will he be brave enough to choose love over law? Will I be strong enough to wait while he figures it out? She closed the diary and touched her lips, still tingling from his kiss. Outside, thunder rolled across the city, and somewhere in the apartment, a piano remained silently waiting in the dark. The rain tapped against her window, a gentle reminder that some storms, once started, couldn't be contained by any contract or clause. In the stillness of her room, Lara realized that tomorrow everything would be different. They had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, broken a rule that couldn't be unbroken. Whether David was ready or not, their carefully constructed arrangement had shattered the moment his lips met hers. Now they would have to face what lay beneath all the legal papers and professional distance. Two hearts beating in sync, two souls recognizing something in each other that no contract could ever define. The only question was whether David would be brave enough to admit it, and whether Lara would be patient enough to wait for him to find that courage. For 3 days after the kiss, David disappeared entirely. No messages, no midnight piano concerts, just silence and the echo of his absence in the vast penthouse. Tasha kept Lara updated. He was working late, in meetings, handling a crisis with the Porter account, but they both knew he was running. On the 4th morning, Lara woke to find an envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a check, enough money to save her family's bookstore 10 times over, and a brief note in David's precise handwriting. The contract is void. You're free to go. Everything has been arranged. Lara stared at the check, her hands shaking. This was what she'd wanted, wasn't it? Her family's security, her freedom, all tied up in a neat little bow. So why did it feel like her heart was being torn apart? She found Mrs. Liu in the kitchen, methodically arranging fresh flowers as if nothing had changed. He left for the office already. Mr. Monroe hasn't been home, Mrs. Liu said softly. He's been staying at the Four Seasons since the other night. Of course he had. David Monroe, master of evasion, had literally fled his own home to avoid dealing with what had happened between them. Lara's phone buzzed. Tasha calling. Have you seen the news? What news? Turn on Channel 6. Now. Lara rushed to the living room and found the remote. The business news channel showed David at a press conference, looking immaculate in a charcoal suit. The headline below read, Monroe and Associates announces merger with Maxwell International. He's merging with Maxwell? Lara felt like she couldn't breathe. After what happened at Le Bernardin, it gets worse, Tasha said grimly. The deal includes David taking over Maxwell's Shanghai office. He's moving to China. For a year. The room seemed to spin. A year in China. The exact length of their original contract, now twisted into an escape route. When? The flight leaves tonight. Lara hung up without responding. She stared at the television where David was now shaking hands with Maxwell, both men smiling for the cameras like old friends. It was a masterful performance, the kind of calculated move that had made David Monroe one of New York's most formidable attorneys. It was also complete cowardice. Before she could second-guess herself, Lara was in motion. She threw on a simple black dress and heels, grabbed her phone and diary, and headed for the elevator. Miss Brooks, Mrs. Liu called after her. Where are you going? To crash a press conference. The lobby of Maxwell International was a cathedral to corporate power, all marble and glass and carefully cultivated intimidation. Lara strode past security like she belonged there, channeling every lesson in confidence that Tasha had taught her. She heard David's voice before she saw him, floating down the hallway from a conference room. This merger represents a new chapter for both firms. Lara pushed open the double doors. Cameras swung toward her, but she kept her eyes fixed on David. He stopped mid-sentence, his practiced smile faltering. Miss Brooks. Maxwell recovered first, his smile razor-sharp. What an unexpected pleasure. I need to speak with Mr. Monroe. Lara's voice carried clearly through the suddenly silent room. About a contract. David's face went carefully blank. I'm in the middle of a press conference. Yes, I can see that. Announcing your strategic retreat to China. Very impressive. She took a step forward. But you forgot something important when you wrote that check this morning. This isn't the time or place, and you forgot that I'm not for sale. Lara pulled the check from her purse and tore it in half. The sound of ripping paper echoed through the stunned silence. You can't just throw money at everything that scares you, David. Cameras were flashing like strobe lights. Maxwell looked like Christmas had come early, but Lara kept her eyes on David, watching the battle play out behind his carefully controlled expression. Miss Brooks, he said, his voice strained. Please. No, you don't get to Miss Brooks me anymore. Not after that kiss. Not after everything. She took another step closer. You want to run away to China? Fine. But at least have the courage to tell me the real reason why. Something cracked in his composure. You know why. Say it. Because I'm falling in love with you. The words exploded out of him, shocking everyone in the room, including himself. Because you've turned my entire world upside down, and I don't know how to handle it. Because every time I look at you, I forget every rule I've ever made for myself. The room erupted in chaos. Reporters shouted questions, cameras clicked frantically, and Maxwell looked like he might spontaneously combust with glee. But Lara heard none of it. She walked up to David, close enough to see the vulnerability in his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands. That's all I needed to hear. She turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and David, Rachmaninoff sounds better on your piano than in a hotel room, in case you were wondering. She walked out with her head high, leaving behind a media frenzy and a man who had finally told the truth. Back in the penthouse, Lara found Tasha waiting. I saw everything on the live stream. That was either the bravest or craziest thing I've ever seen. Probably both. Lara sank onto the couch. What happens now? Now? Tasha grinned. Now we wait to see if David Monroe is finally ready to choose love over law. They didn't have to wait long. Less than an hour later, the elevator chimed. David stepped out, his tie loosened, his hair slightly disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. The merger's off, he said without preamble. Maxwell's furious. My board is in chaos. The press is having a field day. He moved closer, his eyes never leaving Lara's face. And I don't care about any of it. What do you care about? You. He knelt in front of her. Only you. I've spent my entire life building walls, creating systems, controlling everything and everyone around me. Then you came along with your diary and your midnight questions and your absolute refusal to stay in the neat little box I tried to put you in. I've never been good at staying in boxes, Lara said softly. No, you haven't. A smile touched his lips. You want to know the real reason I tried to send you away? Because the moment I kissed you, I knew I could never go back to who I was before. And that terrified me. Does it still terrify you? Yes. He took her hands in his. But not as much as the thought of losing you. Tasha cleared her throat. As touching as this is, there are about 50 reporters downstairs wanting statements about what happened at Maxwell International. Let them wait, David said, not taking his eyes off Lara. I have something more important to do first. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of paper, their original contract. With deliberate care, he tore it in half, then quarters, then kept going until it was nothing but confetti. No more contract, he said. No more arrangements. Just us figuring this out together. If you'll stay. Lara looked at the torn papers scattered around them like snow, at Tasha trying and failing to hide her triumphant grin, at the man kneeling before her with his heart finally exposed. I'll stay on one condition, she said. Anything. Play Rachmaninoff for me again. His smile was like sunrise breaking through clouds. Every night, if you want. Later that evening, after the press statements had been made and the dust had begun to settle, Lara sat in the library writing in her diary. Dear diary, today I watched a man choose love over law, truth over safety, the unknown over the carefully planned. Today David Monroe finally stopped running from his heart. They say the most binding contracts are the ones written not on paper, but on the soul. I think I finally understand what that means. Because when David played Rachmaninoff for me tonight, his hands moving over the keys like he was writing a new kind of contract, one made of music and moonlight and promises that don't need signatures, I knew we were creating something no lawyer could ever draft or define. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is tear up the script and write your own story. Sometimes love is worth the risk of everything changing. Through the open library doors, she could hear David on the phone, dealing with the aftermath of their very public drama. His voice was different now, softer around the edges, less concerned with perfect control. He caught her watching him and smiled. A real smile, unguarded and bright with possibility. Everything had changed, and it was exactly what they both needed. David Monroe's teenage love scandal, power attorney's secret contract with small-town girl, Monroe and Maxwell merger collapses amid romantic drama. Lara stared at the headlines splashed across every newspaper and gossip site in New York. It had been a week since the press conference, and the media frenzy showed no signs of dying down. Each story seemed more sensational than the last, painting her either as a cunning gold digger or an innocent victim of David's manipulation. "Don't read that trash," Tasha said, snatching the tablet from Lara's hands. They were having lunch in a quiet corner of the firm's executive dining room, Lara's first visit to David's professional domain. "And the vultures always circle when there's change in the power structure. But some of what they're saying," Lara pushed her salad around the plate, "about the age difference, about how it all started with a contract, maybe they have a point. The only point that matters is whether it's real." Tasha leaned forward. "Is it?" Before Lara could answer, a hush fell over the dining room. David stood in the doorway, his expression thunderous. A junior associate scurried after him, clutching papers. "Sir, the board is demanding an emergency meeting. They're concerned about the firm's reputation. Schedule it for tomorrow." David's voice was clipped. His eyes found Lara across the room, and his expression softened slightly. "I have more important matters to attend to today." He crossed to their table, ignoring the whispers that followed him. "Ready?" Lara nodded, gathering her things. Today was important. They were flying to Asheville to meet her parents. After the media explosion, David had insisted on facing them in person, explaining everything before they read it in the papers. The private jet ride was quiet. David worked on his laptop while Lara stared out the window, remembering the last time she'd made this journey in the opposite direction. So much had changed since then. "What are you thinking?" David asked softly, closing his laptop. "That my father might punch you." He smiled slightly. "I'd deserve it." "Would you?" She turned to face him. "Everyone keeps talking about how you took advantage of me, but they don't understand. I chose this. I signed that contract knowing exactly what I was doing. You signed it to save your family." His face darkened. "I signed it because I was lonely and intrigued by a girl who loved books as much as I did. Who do you think made the more noble choice?" "Maybe there's no noble choice in love," Lara said. "Maybe there's just what feels right." He reached across the aisle and took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. They'd been doing this more, casual touches, small moments of intimacy that felt more significant than their kiss had been. The Brooks family home looked smaller than Lara remembered, but warmer too. Her mother rushed out as they landed, enveloping her in a fierce hug. "My baby girl, we've been so worried with all those horrible stories in the news." She stopped short, finally looking at David. Her expression cooled noticeably. "Mrs. Brooks." David stepped forward, extending his hand. "I believe I owe you and your husband an explanation." "Damn right you do." Lara's father appeared in the doorway, his face stern. "Come inside, both of you." What followed was one of the most awkward conversations of Lara's life. David explained everything: the original contract, how things had changed, his failed attempt to run away, the press conference drama. He left nothing out, not even his own cowardice. "So you're telling me," her father said slowly, "that you fell in love with my daughter?" "Yes, sir." David met his gaze steadily. "Despite my best efforts not to." "And now, with all this media attention, the scandal, what happens to Lara? Now I protect her." David's voice was firm. "My reputation can take the hit. My firm will survive, but I won't let anyone hurt her. Not the press, not my board, not even my own fears anymore." Lara's mother wiped tears from her eyes. "And the bookstore? The debt? Already taken care of." David pulled out papers from his briefcase. "Not as part of any contract, but because it's the right thing to do. Because Lara loves this store, and I love her." The words still sent shivers down Lara's spine. He'd been saying them more often now, as if each repetition made him braver. Her father stood abruptly. "Show me the store." David followed him out, leaving Lara with her mother. As soon as they were gone, her mother grabbed her hands. "Tell me the truth, sweetheart. Are you happy?" Lara thought about midnight piano concerts and library conversations. about the way David looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, about how he was facing everything, the press, her parents, his own demons, just to be with her. Yes, she said simply, I really am. At the store, David and her father talked for hours. When they returned, both looked more relaxed. Her father even smiled when David asked to see Lara's childhood photos. That night, they stayed at the local inn, David insisting on separate rooms out of respect for her parents. Lara sat on her bed writing in her diary. Dear diary, today I watched the most powerful man I know humble himself before my father. I saw him choose truth over pride, love over reputation. The David Monroe who first offered me that contract would never have done that. But we've both changed. I'm not the same girl who signed away a year of her life either. I'm stronger now, more certain of who I am and what I want. And what I want is him, not the powerful attorney or the wealthy businessman, but the man who plays piano at midnight and fights for what he believes in. A knock at her door interrupted her writing. David stood there looking unusually uncertain. I couldn't sleep, he said. Walk with me. They strolled through Asheville's quiet streets, so different from Manhattan's constant buzz. David took her hand as they walked, his grip warm and sure. Your father showed me something at the store, he said. The reading circle area, where your grandfather used to tell stories. He said it was your favorite place as a child. It still is. Lara smiled at the memory. I used to imagine all sorts of futures there. Did any of them look like this? She squeezed his hand. Not even close. But maybe that's what makes it special. They stopped in front of the store. Through the windows they could see the familiar shelves, the worn armchairs, the corner where generations of children had discovered the magic of books. I want to do something, David said. Not as a contract or an arrangement, but as a gift. I want to help your father expand the store, modernize it while keeping its soul. But only if you both agree. Lara looked at him. This man who had tried to buy her time and ended up giving her his heart instead. Why? Because this place made you who you are. Because stories matter. Because, he pulled her closer. Because I love you, and I want to be part of your story. All of it. Past and future. She kissed him then, under the streetlights of her hometown, in front of the store that had shaped her life. It felt like coming full circle, like ending one chapter and beginning another. When they finally parted, David rested his forehead against hers. We should head back. Your father might still decide to punch me. He won't. Lara smiled. I saw you two talking. What did he say to you? He said that love doesn't need contracts, but it does need courage. David's eyes were serious. He's right. I'm done being a coward, Lara. Whatever comes next, the press, the board, the whole world, we face it together. Back in her room at the inn, Lara added one last line to her diary entry. P.S. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't facing down enemies or making grand gestures. Sometimes it's just a man and a woman, standing in front of a small-town bookstore, choosing to write their own story. No contracts required. Outside her window, Asheville slept peacefully, unaware that within its quiet streets, a love story that had begun with a business arrangement was transforming into something far more powerful. A tale of two people brave enough to choose each other, despite the odds, despite the scandal, despite everything but the truth in their hearts. The emergency board meeting at Monroe and Associates had been going for 3 hours. Lara paced the penthouse living room while Tasha sat perched on the couch, refreshing her email every few minutes. Still nothing, Tasha reported. But no news is good news, right? Before Lara could respond, her phone buzzed with a news alert. Her heart stopped when she read the headline. Leaked. Original contract between David Monroe and Lara Brooks reveals shocking details. That's impossible, Tasha breathed, reading over her shoulder. The only copies were destroyed. But there it was, their contract, in all its clinical glory, splashed across every major news outlet. Not a forgery this time, but the real thing, complete with the watermark that had once saved them at Le Bernardin. Lara's phone exploded with notifications. Reporters, talk show bookers, even a few marriage proposals from strangers who thought they were being romantic, but nothing from David. Maxwell, Tasha growled. It has to be. But how did he get it? The elevator chimed. David walked in, looking more exhausted than Lara had ever seen him. His tie was gone, his sleeves rolled up, and his normally perfect hair was a mess from running his hands through it. The board wants me to step down, he said without preamble. What? Lara stood. They can't do that. You built this firm. They can, and they should. He poured himself a scotch with slightly shaking hands. The contract leak. It's bad, Lara, really bad. But we haven't done anything wrong, haven't we? He turned to face her, his eyes haunted. I wrote a contract to essentially buy a teenage girl's company. The press is calling it modern-day slavery. Women's rights groups are organizing protests outside our offices. Our biggest clients are threatening to leave. Then we fight back. Lara insisted. We tell the truth. The truth? He laughed bitterly. The truth is I saw a beautiful young woman and found a way to make her legally bound to me. The truth is I fell in love with someone I had no business falling in love with. The truth is I'm 15 years older than you and I used my power and money to bring you into my world. That's not the whole truth and you know it. It's enough of the truth to destroy everything I've built. He set down his glass. And worse, it's enough to destroy your future. Lara felt cold dread creep up her spine. She knew that tone. It was the same one he'd used when he'd tried to send her away with a check. Don't, she warned. Don't you dare try to be noble about this. It's not about being noble. He ran a hand through his hair. It's about facing reality. The press won't stop. The protests won't stop. Every move you make for the rest of your life will be scrutinized through the lens of this scandal. I don't care. Well, I do. His voice cracked. I care that you'll never have a normal life. That you'll always be the girl from the contract. That every accomplishment you ever have will be overshadowed by this. Tasha, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, stood up. I'll give you two some privacy. But David, if you're about to do what I think you're about to do, remember what happened last time you tried to make decisions for her? After she left, silence fell between them. David walked to the windows, staring out at the city he'd once ruled so confidently. The board offered me a deal, he said finally. I stepped down temporarily, take a consulting position in London for a year, let the scandal die down. They'll even spin it positively, say I'm expanding our international presence. And what about us? He didn't turn around. You go back to Asheville, finish college, live the life you were meant to have before I complicated everything. No. Lara's voice was steel. You don't get to do this. You don't get to decide what life I was meant to have. Lara, I chose you. She grabbed his arm, forcing him to face her. That contract, I signed it. My choice. Falling in love with you. My choice. Standing by you through this scandal. My choice. Stop trying to protect me from my own decisions. You were 19, he said softly. You signed that contract to save your family. Yes, I did. And look what came from it. She cupped his face in her hands. I found myself. I found strength I didn't know I had. I found you, and now you might lose everything because of me. The only thing I'll lose is you, if you go through with this ridiculous plan. She stepped back, suddenly decisive. You know what? I'm done letting other people control this narrative. Get dressed. What? We're going to do a live interview. Tonight, tell our story, our way. Lara, that's crazy. Crazier than running away to London? She was already pulling out her phone. Tasha, call that reporter who's been begging for an exclusive, the one from the Sunday show. Tell her we'll do it tonight. Live, but only if we get full control of the narrative. David stared at her like she'd lost her mind. Maybe she had, but she was done hiding, done letting others twist their story into something ugly. An hour later, a camera crew was setting up in their living room while a producer briefed them on the format. David had changed into a fresh suit, but he still looked uncertain. Are you sure about this? He asked quietly. No, Lara admitted, but I'm sure about us. The interview started exactly as they'd expected. Questions about the contract, about the age difference, not about power dynamics and manipulation. But then Lara did something unexpected. She pulled out her diary. You want to know the truth? She opened to the first entry. Here it is. Every thought, every feeling, every moment of doubt and discovery. Because this story isn't about contracts or scandals. It's about two people who found love in the most unlikely place. She read excerpts, her first impressions of David, her fears, her growing realization that what had started as a business arrangement was becoming something more. She read about midnight piano concerts and conversations about books, about learning to be strong, about watching him learn to be vulnerable. David sat beside her, holding her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm like it had that first night he'd kissed her. When she finished reading, he spoke. I wrote that contract because I was lonely and intrigued by a young woman who seemed as lost as I was. He said directly to the camera. I fell in love with her because she showed me that all my success, all my careful plans, meant nothing without real connection. And if stepping down from my firm and moving to London is the price of that love, I'll pay it. But not because I'm ashamed. Because sometimes loving someone means being brave enough to face the consequences of your choices. No, Lara interrupted. Love means being brave enough to stay and fight. Together. The interview ended with them looking at each other, all pretense forgotten. They didn't notice when the cameras stopped rolling or when the crew packed up. They were lost in their own world, their own truth. Later that night, Lara wrote in her diary, Dear Diary, tonight we chose truth over safety, love over reputation. We don't know if it will be enough to calm the storm, but maybe that's not what matters. What matters is that when the world tried to shame us for how our love began, we chose to show them how it grew instead. David is sleeping now, finally peaceful after weeks of tension. Tomorrow the papers will run new headlines, the board will make new demands, and we'll face it all together. Because love isn't about perfect beginnings or carefully worded contracts. It's about choosing each other, every day, no matter what the world throws at us. She closed the diary and curled up next to David on the couch where they'd fallen asleep. Outside, the city hummed with its usual energy, indifferent to the drama that had played out on live television. But something had shifted. A truth had been told, and whatever came next, they would face it without hiding. In his sleep, David pulled her closer, murmuring something that sounded like her name. Lara smiled, remembering how far they'd come from that first day when he'd called her Miss Brooks, with such formal distance. Now here they were, their love story broadcast to the world, their truth finally told in their own words. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight they had each other, and that was all that mattered. 1 year to the day after Lara first stepped into David Monroe's penthouse, she stood in the renovated Brooks & Books, watching autumn leaves dance past the new picture windows. The store had been transformed, modern technology seamlessly integrated with its historic charm, fresh paint highlighting original architectural details, and comfortable reading nooks tucked into every corner, but its soul remained unchanged. The same worn leather armchairs still welcomed readers, and the children's corner still hosted Sunday story times. Only now, instead of fighting for survival, the store was thriving. Penny, for your thoughts. David's voice came from behind her. He wrapped his arms around her waist, and she leaned back against him, just thinking about how much has changed in a year. And it had. Their televised interview had changed everything. Not instantly, but gradually, like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. The public's perception shifted as their story spread. Not everyone approved, but enough people understood that love rarely follows conventional rules. The board had eventually backed down, though not without conditions. David had agreed to a 3-month step back from day-to-day operations, using the time to restructure the firm and implement new ethical guidelines. He'd emerged stronger, more respected for facing the scandal head-on. Maxwell had been disgraced when evidence emerged that he'd obtained the contract illegally. Last Lara had heard, he was practicing law in a small firm in New Jersey, a fitting end for someone who'd tried to destroy lives for power. Your father called, David said, pulling her from her thoughts. He wants to know if we're still coming for dinner. Did you tell him we have other plans? I thought I'd leave that to you. He turned her to face him. Are you ready? Lara nodded. Today was special for another reason. They were finally moving into their new home. Not the penthouse where their story began, but a brownstone in the West Village, with room for both their books and their dreams. Almost. Just need to do one thing first. She walked to the reading circle area and pulled out her diary. Not the original one that had chronicled their beginning, but its successor. She'd filled it with a year's worth of moments. Their first Christmas together, quiet Sunday mornings, the day David taught her to play Rachmaninoff badly, the night they decided to buy the brownstone. Dear Diary, she wrote, this is my last entry in this volume. Like the contract that started everything, some stories need to end so new ones can begin. But unlike that contract, this ending isn't about business or obligation. It's about choice, about love, about two people who rewrote all the rules to create something real. Still keeping secrets in that diary, David teased, coming to sit beside her. No secrets. She smiled. Just our story. Speaking of stories, He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. "I have something for you." Inside was a single piece of paper, not a contract this time, but a deed. The brownstone would be in both their names. "I wanted to do this right," he said softly. "No more arrangements, no more power imbalances. Just us, building a life together as equals." Lara traced her fingers over their names, side by side on the paper. "It's perfect. There's something else." He seemed almost nervous now. "Look at the witness signature line." She turned the page and gasped. There, in fresh ink, was her father's signature. "You asked his permission?" "Not for the house." David took her hands in his. "Lara Brooks, I spent most of my life thinking love was a liability, that emotions could be contained in contracts and clauses. Then you walked into my world and shattered every rule I'd ever made." He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket, and Lara's heart stopped. "I'm not offering a contract this time," he continued, opening the box to reveal a vintage sapphire ring. "I'm offering my heart, my future, everything I am. Will you marry me?" Tears blurred her vision as she looked at the ring, then at the man she'd grown to love against all odds. "On one condition." He raised an eyebrow. "Waiting. Play Rachmaninoff at our wedding." David laughed, that real, unguarded laugh she'd worked so hard to unlock. "Every day for the rest of our lives, if you want." The ring fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her finger all along. Outside, the autumn wind sent more leaves dancing past the windows, gold and red like the sunset starting to paint the sky. "We should get going," David said eventually. "The movers will be waiting at the brownstone." But Lara held him back for a moment, taking in the store that had started everything. Without her family's struggle, without that desperate need to save this place, she might never have signed that first contract, never have met David, never have discovered her own strength. "Thank you," she whispered. "Oh, for what?" "For trying to buy my time and ending up giving me your heart instead." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "Best investment I ever made." Later that night, in their new home filled with half-unpacked boxes and infinite possibilities, Lara opened a new diary. On its first page, she wrote, "Dear Diary, once upon a time, a girl signed a contract that was supposed to last 1 year. Instead, she found a love that would last a lifetime. But that's not where the story ends. It's where it truly begins. Because sometimes the most beautiful stories start with broken rules and torn-up contracts. Sometimes love is found in the space between what we plan and what we never saw coming. Sometimes two people who are brave enough to choose each other, despite every reason not to, create something stronger than any legal document could ever bind." David is calling me now. Something about choosing which room will be our library. As if we both don't know the books will eventually take over the whole house. Tonight we'll probably end up sitting on moving boxes, eating takeout, and planning our wedding. Tomorrow we'll start arranging our life together, one book and one memory at a time. The contract that brought us together is long gone, torn to pieces and scattered like confetti, but we're still here, still choosing each other, still writing our own rules, and that's the most beautiful contract of all. She closed the diary and went to find David. He was at the piano they'd moved in first, playing their song, not Rachmaninoff this time, but something new, something he'd composed himself, a love story written in notes instead of words. Lara sat beside him on the bench, letting her head rest on his shoulder as he played. Outside their windows, Manhattan sparkled like a sky full of earthbound stars. But the real magic was here, in this room, in this moment, in the simple truth that sometimes love's greatest power lies not in the rules it follows, but in the ones it dares to break. The music flowed around them, weaving past and present into future, turning their story into something timeless. And in that moment, Lara knew with absolute certainty that this love, this life, this man, was worth every risk, every scandal, every broken rule, because in the end, the most binding contracts aren't written on paper at all. They're written on the heart, signed with trust and sealed with love that's brave enough to rewrite all the rules. 5 years later, the evening sun painted golden streaks across the brownstone's library walls, illuminating countless books and the memories they held. Lara sat in her favorite window seat, a new leather-bound diary in her hands, watching David read to their 3-year-old daughter, Lucy. "Again, Daddy!" Lucy bounced on his knee, her dark curls, so like her father's, bouncing with her. The princess story. You've heard it 3 times already, sweetheart. David chuckled, but his eyes met Lara's over their daughter's head. They both knew which story Lucy meant. Their story, carefully adapted into a fairy tale about a brave young woman who taught a lonely king that love was more powerful than any royal decree. Tasha burst through the door, as energetic as ever, despite her now prominent baby bump. Sorry I'm late. Board meeting ran long. She collapsed dramatically onto a leather armchair. But guess who's officially the new managing partner of Monroe and Associates? Congratulations. Lara hugged her friend. I told you the promotion was yours. Well, someone had to take over while this one, Tasha gestured at David, spends half his time reading stories and playing piano. David smiled, unrepentant. The firm still bore his name, but he'd gradually stepped back from daily operations, focusing instead on mentoring young lawyers and, more importantly, being present for his family. The sharp-edged attorney who once lived by contracts and clauses had softened, though he could still be formidable when needed. Uncle Max, Lucy squealed as Maxwell Wright, Tasha's husband and David's newest junior partner, appeared in the doorway. The irony of his sharing a name with their old nemesis had become a running joke, though this Maxwell was everything the other wasn't. Kind, ethical, and genuinely devoted to justice. Ready for dinner? Maxwell asked, helping his very pregnant wife up. Your parents are already at the restaurant, Lara. The weekly family dinner had become tradition after Lucy's birth. The Brooks family would drive up from Asheville once a month to join them, and during other weeks, their extended family of choice filled the seats. Tasha and Maxwell, Mrs. Liu and her husband, even some of David's reformed board members who'd become true friends. Almost ready, Lara said. Just need to finish something first. She opened her diary, the latest in a collection that chronicled their life together, and wrote, Dear Diary, 5 years ago, I wrote about endings that become beginnings, about love that rewrites rules and hearts that sign contracts no paper could ever hold. Looking at our life now, at David teaching Lucy to play simple tunes on the piano, at our family that's grown beyond blood to include so many beautiful souls, at the way love continues to surprise and strengthen us, I realize that some stories don't need endings at all. They just need people brave enough to keep writing new chapters, keep breaking old rules, keep choosing each other every single day. That contract I signed at 19, it was meant to bind me for a year. Instead, it freed me for a lifetime. Because sometimes the most powerful contracts aren't the ones we sign with ink, but the ones we write with love. Ready now? David asked softly, Lucy dozing against his shoulder. Lara closed her diary and smiled. Ready. As they left their home, this beautiful space filled with books and music and love, the setting sun caught David's wedding ring, making it glint like a promise kept. He took her hand, and together they stepped into the evening, toward their waiting family, toward another chapter in their ongoing story. Some said their love would never last, that it was built on too fragile a foundation, born from a contract rather than choice. But they'd proven that love doesn't care how it begins, only how it grows, how it strengthens, how it transforms from ink on paper to something so deep and true that no document could ever contain it. And that was a story worth writing, worth living, worth passing down to the next generation. A story of courage, of growth, of love, that dared to break every rule to write its own happy ending. Or perhaps not an ending at all, just a beautiful, endless middle, stretching out before them like pages waiting to be filled. The end. If you were in Lara's shoes, would you have the courage to sign a 1-year contract with a powerful, lonely man to save your family's business? What's more, if it were you, would you be able to keep the deal professional when your heart started to beat faster? Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you for watching. Your feedback is very important to our work. Please leave a comment telling us what you think and where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any stories. Your participation is very important for the continuation of our work, so share it with those who will love this story.